Probably one of the most famous propaganda campaigns, we could just call it a marketing campaign, is the sexing up pop culture icon that is today Che Guevara. It has no resemblance to the actual man Che Guevara. In Miami, you talked a little bit about that campaign and how they turned him into this sex symbol, basically.
Correct. For many years, I thought, oh, this was obviously made up by the Active Measures Department of Cuban intelligence, but I had no proof of that. And, we published a book that I wrote in 2011 on Che Guevara's forgotten victims, because we realized when we looked at the bibliography, there was nothing on his many victims and a lot on his own personal life and any minutia about Che Guevara. And we're like, this is outrageous. And we would get a lot of calls asking about Che Guevara. And then about 2 years ago, I was reading a book by Ion Pacepa, who was the head of Securitate from Romania, which was the intelligence service of Romania during the Soviet years. And he defected to the United States, I believe it was 1978. And he writes a book on propaganda. I'm very fascinated by the topic. And long and behold, there's his testimony. They were instructed by the KGB to all of the services from the satellites to help the Cuban intelligence services, because they were initiating a campaign to sell the idea of Che Guevara, to romanticize the Cuban Revolution. They had to clean up the image of, the mass executions and the political prisoners and everything with this sexed up idea of the Cuban Revolution. And it was a deliberate campaign that aided by the KGB that started with, the massification of this image by a photographer with the alias Corda, Cuban photographer. And then this writer for the KGB produced a book on Che Guevara's life. And then this Italian millionaire who was a communist and KGB hand propagated through the posters and the whole image of Che Guevara that we see now. And it's probably been one of the most successful marketing campaigns of all time.
And it's completely erased. Let's talk about who he really was for a minute, because it's frustrating when I see young people and pop stars in the United States wearing these shirts. And I want to stop them and say, really? Let me tell you a little bit about who this guy actually was. By any modern standard, he was just a monster.
He was a Taliban. He didn't care about life. He was willing to take people's lives. And this is proven from when he was in the Sierra Maestra, actually. There's a lot of testimonies, and I've had the opportunity of speaking with people who knew him well, who were there when these things happened, including the priest at La Cabaña Fortress prison, where the first executions happened, where he was the head of the tribunal, of the appellate tribunal, and people who spent a lot of time with him. And you don't even have to go to those testimonies. You just have to read what he wrote in his own diaries. And the guy does, come off as a psychopath. He would recite a poem that is macabre. In the second edition of our book, that is on Amazon, it's called Che Guevara's Forgotten Victims, I add several testimonies, and one is of this poem that he used to recite about skulls and deads and cemeteries, that he was obsessed with this. I also have Pacepa's testimony in there. And then the other thing that I added in the second edition is this testimony of this military guy who goes to train the Cubans in Mexico who were preparing to invade Cuba during the Batista regime. That's where Che Guevara enters the picture for Cuba. They met in Mexico, and he talks about how he would, he welcomed the opportunity to kill dogs, to practice, whereas the others were having problems with that. He was eager to kill. And how he told the Castro brothers, this is your man. I mean, they were ready to implant terror in Cuba, and they needed people like that. And you could see it. It was immediate in Cuba. They started to execute immediately after they took power. It didn't matter if people were guilty or not. There were abuses committed during the Batista regime, and we've actually documented that. but never to the extent that they later said. That's one of the myths, but still. But even, people who were accused of atrocities, it was based on lies. It was based on the premise, let's create terror, and they needed people like Che Guevara for that.